to become an anti-racist multicultural community. And it's important. We're a very multicultural country, but we're not anti-racist. We're very multicultural, but we're not anti-racist. So we want to really look at what some of those stages are. In the very beginning stages, you have racial and cultural differences are seen as deficits. People may be tolerant of racial and cultural differences. Eventually, people can reach a stage where racial and cultural differences are seen as assets. And what happens in stage one, you have what would be called an exclusive and an excluding community. It enforces the racist status quo of dominance and exclusion of racial and ethnic peoples through historical and traditional conditions. And we know that that existed. Just changing the 1954 law, desegregation law, in fact made it illegal to continue in that way. Did it change it de facto? No, but it did change in the law. To become tolerant of a limited number of racial and ethnic peoples, and those are people with the proper perspectives, and we're going to talk about that, certain proper credentials who become acceptable. And then the third step is racial and cultural differences seen as assets. And that is a symbolic change. And so what we begin seeing are some differences there. People begin to see a symbolic change committed to inclusion of racial and ethnic peoples. There's some symbolic inclusion. And you know that companies, and I remember this very well, began to recruit for someone of color, but one who won't make waves. And those of us who maybe have a little more gray in our hair remember that happening. That sometimes people who should not have been in positions were put in there simply because they were a person of color. So we wanted to have that kind of symbolic change happening in the country. Eventually, we get to an analytic change where there is a desire to eliminate discriminatory practices, and we become sensitive to differences. Now, everyone in this room is not on the same point on the continuum. Some people sitting in here may still be exclusive and want to enforce racist status quo and want to remain dominant and want to remain exclusive. Some people are passive still, tolerant, and say, well, you know, but they're not going to do anything. They only want to be around a certain kind of person of color. You know, only if you have certain kinds of credentials and you can speak a certain way. And we all know we've experienced that, haven't we? Be truthful. All right. So our next stages that we go to are structural change, a redefining community. And this is moving us really towards becoming much more anti-racist in our looks and our outcomes. We move beyond just being anti-racist, anti-sexist, and we see the benefits of a broad racial and cultural perspective. There's a willingness to struggle, and I think that's most of the people who are in this room today are here, at least because you're open to the idea of being willing to struggle. You have a willingness to share in problem solving. Policies, you're shaping policies and models for inclusive decision making in community life. Many of you who may be sitting out there who are going to be or are involved in the community at different levels, hopefully will come away from this forum and others like it with an understanding that you always have to think of how to be inclusive in your decision making and in your policies. And that will shape the way you look at people and the way you bring people into organizations and the way you educate, and the way you educate students. Okay, and then finally we get to inclusive, which would be a transformed community. And that is a community that's committed to confronting and dismantling racism throughout the larger community. It begins at a personal level, and the transformation process starts with your individual selves, but it has to go further. And hopefully what we're going to do here today is bring us a little further along on the continuum. You're going to create allies or work in coalition with others in combating social oppression. And that's the key word. I have a good friend, I used to serve on a Civil Rights Commission in New Jersey, and a good friend who was head of that was a person from the continent of India. And he says, you know, we're the originators of one of the most racist systems in the world, the caste system. But we haven't taken care of home. And so while I feel for people who are Dalit and other people who are oppressed in many, many areas of the world, I'm concerned here today with the United States of America. I'm concerned here with Cumberland County, Fayetteville. You know, that's what I'm concerned with, North Carolina. And the rest of the United States. Where are we in America? Because we can't look at other cultures and begin to make changes there until we're willing to look at ourselves and begin to make changes here. We tend not to want to look at the caste system that exists here. And we don't call it a caste system. And we don't even want to admit that we have classes in this country. Okay? So again, we're going to look inward today. And that doesn't, I don't want to diminish anyone else's oppression, whether it's gender, sexual orientation. There are so many oppressions. But we're going to look at this particular one today, here in the US of A, okay?